Welcome to some dear friends here, really dear friends. I'm Jane Harmon, the president and CEO of the Wilson Center and a former 9-term member of Congress, where I made many acquaintances far and wide, and I just can tell you, it was an honor to serve in our Congress. It is a bigger honor not to be serving in our Congress and to preside over a wonderful institution that is dedicated to trying to get the facts right and being bipartisan in doing so. A special welcome to a national treasure, Secretary George Shultz, and to the new president of MIT, Rafael Reif. Last year, the Wilson Center honored Hillary Clinton with our Woodrow Wilson Award for Public Service. And to set this up, I called all 6 former living secretaries of state and asked if they would do a joint movie. And so they agreed. And the movie we produced, which Hillary loved, is wonderful. The star of the movie is George Shultz. And George Shultz sang. And it goes something like this. Don't worry, be happy. And during some of the most challenging times in American history, he has combined this delicious personality with a razor-sharp intellect. And it hasn't diminished at all. I think he is ageless. I'm sure he is ageless. And we are all, the rest of us, envious and delighted. If there's ever a story that could lead to a don't worry, be happy outcome, it is North America's changing energy landscape. Energy is absolutely critical to everything we do: food, clothing, cars, trains, airplanes, houses, buildings, lighting, cooling, heating, the entire IT infrastructure. Energy security is obviously therefore national security. At home, increasing our capacity to produce shale oil and natural gas will create jobs, foster economic growth, but at the same time, we need to find responsible ways to extract those resources without endangering the environment. And by the way, just next door, on this floor, in this building, we have the Canadian energy industry and the Canadian ambassador and a few others talking about not just the Keystone Pipeline, but about North American energy independence and the keys to getting there. Already, by the way, the use of shale natural gas generates about half the carbon dioxide as the use of coal, thus reducing the rise of global warming. A broad, game-changing energy technology will bolster our allies, and at the same time, it can significantly reduce the geopolitical footprint of countries like Iran and Russia. The Wilson Center, as I began to mention, is the living memorial to our first internationalist president, Woodrow Wilson, who was sworn in 100 years ago this month. We seek to build a global brain trust, a network that generates actionable ideas and prepares the next generation of leaders for the policy challenges ahead. We were chartered by Congress in 1968. A lot of people somehow missed that. But we think that discussion like the one that happens today is a key to the value we offer to the Washington and international policymaking communities. Let me just mention a game changer, it's actually game, that we have put out there and that can, and I think will have relevance to the whole energy situation. We pioneered a game 5 years ago called Budget Hero that is an interactive video game and lets those playing the game pick what their values are and earn badges connected to their values, but then make the tough choices to balance our budget, or at least to reduce the growth of our deficit and debt. And everyone who plays this game comes away and says, oh my God, it's so hard. You have to think big. Pete Domenici, I know, delicious Pete Domenici, who's here. I just hugged him, so I know there he is, would agree with that. The group that brought us Budget Hero, our science and technology group here, which has a focus on serious games, is now trying to adapt that methodology to focus on energy and the energy trade-offs, especially in North America. Like the energy game changers in this room, we are focusing on technological advances as game changers in energy, water, advanced manufacturing, and so forth, and our work in that space will continue. So it is now a privilege to introduce the president of MIT, Raphael Reif. President Reif served as director of MIT's Microsystems Technology Labs and as MIT's provost for 17 years. Meanwhile, he also found a way to hold 15 patents. President Reif, you should know that we're all counting on you and MIT because Stapleton Roy, Ambassador Stapleton Roy, who's head of our Kissinger Institute and our former ambassador to China, recently led a group of very senior Chinese visitors on a tour of your media lab. As they walked out of the lab after seeing one amazing project after another, according to Stape, one of the Chinese visitors said, "Well, maybe it's not all over for America yet." So, the future of our country may rest in your capable hands. Please welcome President Reif of MIT.
Good afternoon, and thank you, President Harmon. Just one minor clarification. I was provost, but if I would have been provost for 17 years, I wouldn't look this young. I only suffered that job for 7 years. So good afternoon. I want to start by thanking Secretary George Shultz for bringing together this exceptional group. To get so many important people to travel to Washington through an almost snowstorm is a true test of convening power, and we are deeply grateful that Secretary Shultz is using his convening power to accelerate progress in energy. I also want to offer my personal thanks to Professor Bob Angstrom. Yes, you, Bob. For heading up MIT's delegation. Bob was a driving force behind the MIT Energy Initiative long before it was launched in 2006, and he has been instrumental in its ongoing success. The roster of speakers today is truly remarkable, but I might pause to note that under ordinary circumstances, we would be joined in this conversation by Professor of Physics and MIT Director of the Energy Initiative, Ernie Moniz. As you all know, I'm sure, this week President Obama selected Ernie as his candidate for Secretary of Energy. If he is confirmed, we will certainly miss him at MIT. But we're very proud that he has been proposed for this vital position of national and in many ways international leadership. And I must tell this to Secretary Shultz, we can share that pride with Stanford, since Ernie joined the MIT faculty after earning a Stanford PhD. Knowing Ernie as we do, we are excited to think that he might be able to bring his extraordinary knowledge, vision, enthusiasm, and leadership to the Department of Energy. We are also confident that the MIT Energy Initiative will carry on full speed ahead. Ernie, Bob Angstrom, and their colleagues have built a powerful engine for energy progress. They have focused mighty, as we call our MIT Energy Initiative. They focus mighty on two simultaneous, interconnected assignments: developing innovations to make current energy systems more efficient and effective, and seeking transformations that aim indeed to change the game on energy and climate change. MIT has assembled an incredibly interdisciplinary team of MIT researchers, not only scientists and engineers, but economists and political scientists, architects and planners, system experts and entrepreneurs. The breadth of this approach has allowed MIT to be extremely effective in developing not just new technologies, but new policy ideas as well. And MIT has translated those policy recommendations in a series of influential reports to Congress. Under Ernie's leadership, MIT has increased its potential for impact by building a global network of collaborations in industry, government, and academia. He has worked actively to train the next generation of energy experts, in part by creating an interdisciplinary energy minor at MIT. And he has kept us focused on the true meaning of success, the ability to deliver energy dependably, affordably, and on a massive scale. We're deeply grateful to him for his service to MIT, and we have the highest hopes for him through this confirmation process. With this room full of energy experts, I will resist the temptation to frame myself the energy conversation. But I have a few thoughts on the broader context that we're working in. We all know this is a moment of significant new developments in energy, ranging from some possible signs of a new willingness to address climate change to America's new strength in natural gas, which presents a bridge to a sustainable energy future that we would not have predicted a decade ago. And we have come together to consider such important energy issues. But the most significant new development pressing on our thoughts today is not even an energy question. As we all know, 6 days ago, the US felt the first blow of sequestration. For federal research agencies, the cuts are severe. Federally funded R&D will be reduced across the board, as you know very well, by 5 to 8% in 2013, and cuts and stagnation will continue through 2021. Many agencies are planning furloughs, slashing the size of grants, and eliminating programs altogether. For instance, the Department of Energy's Science Office has already announced the cancellation of 2 important programs: an advanced X-ray research project, the Next Generation Light Source, slated for Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in California, and a separate billion-dollar expansion project at Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee. And the cuts will hurt well-established programs as well. The Fermilab in Illinois, for example, is planning to furlough its entire staff, around 700 people, at some point in the fiscal year. I expect you may know of even more frustrating examples. For research currently underway, the impact of the sequester cuts will be serious. But the budget figures above and alone cannot capture everything that is at stake. Those budget figures cannot tell us the number of brilliant young scientists and engineers who, discouraged by lack of funding, will simply walk away from research. If we lose them, we lose a generation of transformational energy ideas. And the budget numbers only hint a very destructive possibility: the potential unraveling of the long-standing, hugely productive relationship between the US government and America's research universities. Now, you could look around this room and see a gathering of some of the most creative and influential individuals in energy research today. Or you could look at this room and say, the innovators here and the teams and technologies they represent are an incredible expression of the value of the American Research University. As a group, our innovators would not offer the nation the same value, the same capacity to tackle these tremendously complex scientific projects if they were all to work independently in their own garages. The advanced scientific advances that emerge from their labs are born from the creative collaboration of extensive teams of faculty, postdocs, and students. Their work requires daring experimentation sustained over months and years. It depends on extraordinarily complex and costly equipment, and it is worth every penny. This argument was made definitely last year in a report from the National Academies on Research Universities and the Future of America. If the US wants solutions to the grand challenge of a sustainable energy future, I believe it needs to invest more and not less in the research engine of its finest universities. Certainly, some of that research can and should come from industry and other sources, but much of it must come from universities where researchers have the creative freedom of an academic lab. A separate but perhaps even more important point is the following. Universities also play a unique and crucial role in providing policymakers with objective information. Here in Washington and in state capitals, and even in corporate boardrooms, the people charged with making decisions about energy strategy and policy need to know that there are objective sources they can trust. They need institutions that can interpret the most advanced science and deliver the facts without bias or hidden agendas. In other words, they need the power of America's research universities. Today, as the world faces grave problems around energy and climate and related challenges around water and food, society needs the creative force of its universities more than ever. So as we begin today's conversation, let us celebrate the brilliant tradition of the federal university partnership that brought us this far, and let us commit to doing everything in our power to preserve it so we can help the nation achieve a sustainable energy future. Thank you. Let me now introduce someone that if I were to spend time introducing him properly, I would cut extremely into my own talk today. So I didn't do that. Instead, I'm going to say it's a visionary leader who really needs no introduction. Please welcome Secretary George Shultz.
Let me start by telling two stories and then trying to extract lessons from them. In 1969, I was assigned by the President to chair a cabinet task force on the oil import program. President Eisenhower thought that if we imported more than 20% of the oil we used, we were asking for trouble in national security terms. We studied that possibility. We wrote a report that was published. We said that the problem really isn't so much military as kerfuffles in the Arab-Israeli scene that could lead to problems. And we recommended that we reduce drastically any imports from that part of the world, but also develop a repository for oil so we had something and maximize the amount of oil we get from Canada and adjacent places. The President patted me on the head and said, "Thank you for a nice report." There were hearings, a lot of attention paid to the hearing. Nothing was done. A few years later, I'm Secretary of the Treasury in 1973. On comes the Arab oil boycott. We resupplied the Israelis in the Yom Kippur War. That was why we were broadcasting. It was interesting. Britain and France wouldn't let us land at their airfields, so they were rewarded. So it was very carefully administered. At that time, oil was the producer of a lot of our electricity. So not only did we have a national security issue here, we had an economic issue and a deep cultural issue because Christmas lights were doused. And you may remember, some of you from those days, that the President asked gas stations to close on Saturday and Sunday so people wouldn't drive, and so on. So it was a big deal. What did I learn from this? Well, number one, even if you have a good strategic insight, that seems compelling logically, like you should prepare for the possibility of cutoffs from the Middle East. Probably it's hard to get anything done about it unless an event comes and hits you. The second thing I learned was that when this happened, a lot of people would come in. There was no energy department, so the Treasury was, in effect, the energy department. They came to us. And people would come with ideas for alternatives. And I could see that there was nothing really very doable there, but there were a lot of interesting ideas, and so we encouraged it. But of course, as soon as the price went back down, everything stopped. So it's hard to sustain energy R&D in the face of lower oil and gas prices. Next, I want to relate what happened in the mid-1980s. In this story, I'm the Secretary of State, and we are hearing from scientists that the ozone layer is depleting. And as time went on, more and more of the scientists thought that, although we're very credible doubters. But they all agreed that if it were to happen, it would be a catastrophe. As it happened, I had twice a week private meetings with President Reagan, and we talked about it. And President Reagan decided we better take out an insurance policy. And it can't be too expensive. If the doubters are right, well, we've had an insurance policy. If the doubters are wrong, we better have done something about it. Because if you wait until it's overpowering, you've missed the boat. Out of that came something called the Montreal Protocol. And it was interesting how when something clearly is out there, that the ingenuity of the American scientific and business enterprise kicks in. In this case, the DuPont company came up with an idea that turned out to be critical. And through the Montreal Protocol, the problem was abated. As it turned out, the scientists who were worried were right, and the Montreal Protocol came along in the nick of time. So why do I tell you these two stories? Because I think right now, as has been said, we are on the cusp of a much better energy future than we have really ever had, because there are two revolutions underway. And we can get it if we play our cards right. It's not certain that we play our cards right, but it's not that difficult. In the first place, we have what's been opened up by the fracking technology. And we have almost a sudden surge of the availability of natural gas. It's interesting, especially because people say the energy industry is so vast that nothing can change it very much in the short run, but this has happened almost like that. It can be changed. This technology is available in other countries too. There's lots of shale deposits around. So I think it is essential that everything can be done to protect that technology. There are known problems. There are known ways of dealing with the problems. And the issue is, are we able to put up the kind of regulatory and licensing regime that will see to it that people don't come on in and cut corners and wind up with an environmental catastrophe that sets everything back. That's our issue. And a lot of people are working on that issue, and I'm optimistic that it can be dealt with adequately. because the problems are known and because the solutions are known. It's a matter of, it isn't like an insoluble problem, it's a problem of getting to do it right. So that's one revolution. The second one is in research and development. Having watched this over the years, problems arise, people get interested, problem solved, everything stops. I think we have to be very alert to the threat, in a sense, of plentiful natural gas and oil suddenly turning people off of R&D, and that cannot be allowed to happen this time. We are really getting somewhere. There is a greater mass of first-class science and engineering work being done on this subject now than ever before in this country and in other parts of the world. I'm most familiar with the Stanford and the MIT work, and we have joined forces now for a couple of years in examining possible game changers and exchanging ideas on the science. And this is the third meeting that we've convened on this subject. So the message from a careful look at this R&D work is, a lot has been done already that works and is commercially in business. A lot more is sitting there kind of on the cusp, and it's quite clear that progress will be made if we keep at it. Things close to commercialization that can make a big difference. And we know that there are other things that the people working on will be the first to say they've got a ways to go. But they're really getting there conceptually. You know, anybody who's worked on anything of a research notion knows that getting it correct conceptually and getting yourself organized right is essential in such a project. An example of this is large-scale storage of electricity. I'm confident that we're going to learn how to do that. That's a big deal. And there are many other big deals. And we have to remember that our national security is involved here. I don't just restrict that to military things, but rather we know that our country is threatened by cyber attacks. We don't like it, we are objecting and so on, but anyway, it's a reality. One of the things that means is the more we have energy located where you use it, the safer we are going to be. And work goes forward on that subject. I have a little prop that I like to use because I'm a Marine. I'm always looking at what the Marines are doing. And Marines like to be light, you know, we are movable, we move. And you tend to have big backpacks these days because full of electronic gear and so on, batteries and whatnot. So you want to lighten up, and here's one of the ways you lighten up in Afghanistan and such places. Have a little deal like this. Unfolds 12 solar panels, charge up your stuff, put it back, you're in business. Distributed energy. So we have our national security issues, but I think that we have to confront the fact that there is a climate problem. I know, I read that people here in Washington don't think so, but out in the boonies in California where we're all nutcases, we think so. And Gary Ruffhead, I think, is going to show a little later a very interesting film. You want to look at it carefully. Because whatever you may think of the science, what's happening in the Arctic is a matter of pure observation. And what it turns out is that the sea ice has been melting over a period of years in a kind of gradual way. And then about 2007, suddenly there's a discontinuity and the melting goes on at a much sharper pace. It's the discontinuities we have to worry about. And my opinion is that we should get back to Ronald Reagan's insurance policy on this subject. And those of us who think it's real can work at it. Those of us who are doubting should be willing to say, look, particularly if the insurance policy isn't too expensive, we should take it out. And the R&D that's going on can be increased over what it is. It isn't that much in the scheme of things. When I was budget director, I used to round to a larger number than the total here. But it's very high-powered money and can be extremely important in the scheme of things. So MIT and Stanford have gotten together to compare notes over the years, reinforce each other, and reinforce this tremendous point. My own program for the right insurance policy is, number one, substantial and sustained support for energy R&D. I underline the word sustained because you don't get anywhere if you have a burst and then everything stops. I think it's also a good idea to cause our new automobiles, at least, to be flex fuel. Doesn't cost very much. And it's by way of saying that the engine is not a monopoly of gasoline. Other things can be used more easily by such an adaptation of the energy. Then I think it's also worthwhile to put all forms of energy on the same level playing field. After all, if you're going to have a football game, you don't have a football game where one side has 6 downs and the other has 2. You want everybody to have the same rules. So every form of energy should bear its full cost. Then you have a level playing field and people can compete. Right now, some forms of energy put out a lot more pollution than others do. So as I see it, it would be a good thing to have a revenue-neutral carbon tax. Such a tax would level the playing field. And if it's revenue-neutral, it's purely and simply for that reason. There's no other reason. And tax policy and spending, that's a different subject. But this subject is purely and simply to level the playing field. And I have all kinds of wacky ideas about how to create it revenue neutral, but I'll leave that to the side. At any rate, I look forward to the discussion this afternoon, and I know we'll have some illustrations of things that have been accomplished, and I wholeheartedly support the efforts, not only what's going on at Stanford and MIT, but all around the country in different places that are working at this subject. So I look forward to the afternoon. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Armstrong from the MIT Energy Initiative. President Harmon's reference to the Chinese visits to the Media Lab reminded me of an interesting project that they had underway for a number of years, looking at all of the embedded computing power we have in today's appliances. You find little microchips in lots of different devices. And so they wanted to do a project looking at how all of these could be combined to make a completely different kitchen of the future. So given the recent press about Chinese military hacking into U.S. computer systems, I wonder if that wasn't what they came to look at. So they might have noticed in the description of research at the Media Lab, the title on this project was Counterintelligence. So the Media Lab does work with a lot of MIT Energy Initiative problems. I'm not going to talk about any of those today other than the counterintelligence. What I'd like to do is spend a few minutes framing the technology options and technology challenges that face us as a setup to the panels that we have as the main feature in the afternoon. So I'll begin with the challenges facing us, and these echo comments that Secretary Schultz has made. In the supply challenges that we face, security challenges, and environmental challenges. So I'm going to say just a few words about each of those as a preface to looking at the technology challenges and options. On supply, we use today, as I think most of you are well aware, we use an enormous amount of energy globally. We burn on the rate, burn energy at a rate of about 500 exajoules per year. That works out to about 16 terawatts as a burn rate for energy. About 18 kilowatt hours of that are electricity, so enormous amount of energy consumption in the particular form of electricity. Most of that today is fossil fuel, coal, oil, natural gas. Each of those has its special market. We project, looking forward in a business-as-usual scenario, a doubling of energy use by mid-century and a tripling of electricity use in this business-as-usual scenario. Even so, if we look out to, say, 2030, we expect a substantial part of the world's population, maybe 1.4 billion people, will still not have access to electricity. So substantial inequity in access to energy. Lastly, I'd like to point to the very long timescales involved in turnovers in the energy system, driven by the high capital cost of these systems and the very large infrastructures that need to be put in place that literally span the globe. To illustrate the slow turnover time in energy, I've borrowed a slide here that was originally prepared by Steve Koonin, which looks at the U.S. energy supply from 1850 to 2000, and looks at the energy supply broken down into fractional contributions from different energy sources. And you look back at 1850, and you see that we were primarily dependent on biomass. So we burned wood for most of our energy. Coal started to penetrate in the mid-1800s and replace wood as an energy source. It was much more energy-dense source of fuel, and also much more easily mined and stored. But the turnover, if you look at the penetration, the time it took for an order 1 changeover from biomass to coal took on the order of 50 to 70 years. So it's a very approximate time in there. In the early 1900s, we began to recognize the value of oil. We started to produce oil and recognize the real convenience factor and value of oil as a transportation fuel. Much easier to use for shipping. Winston Churchill recognized this and pushed oil conversion in the Royal Navy. And certainly in automobile transportation, it was easily the dominant fuel going forward. Nonetheless, even given the convenience, again, a 50-year time horizon for the transformation. And so on. You see gas penetration taking place also on these long time scales. So long time scales to make a changeover, even when you see substantial advantages to new energy sources. Security, second big piece of this triple threat. There, I think a key driver is the geopolitical and geographical realities of oil and gas, where we find oil in particular and where it's consumed on the planet, which dictates a global transportation system to move oil from producing regions to consuming regions. There are vulnerabilities in this extended energy delivery system. It's clear today that particularly in the electricity system, we increasingly are concerned about the extended grid and cybersecurity issues around the grid. We see also cybersecurity issues in oil systems. The experience with Saudi Aramco's hacking problem back in August certainly drove home the point that we are all vulnerable to that sort of attack. Nuclear has its own concerns with potential weapons proliferation, accompanying spread of nuclear power, and so on. The third leg of this perfect storm is the environment. As Secretary Schultz mentioned, there is increasing agreement that this is a phenomenon we need to deal with. There's broad agreement in the science community that temperatures are rising and that is driven by increasing amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere. Once again, if we look at a target level for CO2 in the atmosphere going forward, if we set it at, say, 550 parts per million, in a business-as-usual scenario, we would exhaust our CO2 emissions budget by mid-century. So about another 50 years involved in how much more CO2 emitting we can do in a business-as-usual scenario. And of course, some people think that 550 ppm is too much. Some think that 550 ppm is unachievable because we've gone too far already. But it certainly highlights the challenge we have there in decarbonizing our energy system over the next 50 years. So what are the challenges for energy technology? I would put these in three broad categories, the first being increased efficiency. I think experts around the world agree that the low-hanging fruit in energy is energy efficiency. Lots of ways we can use less energy and achieve the same standard of living that we have today. An interesting research component to this, of course, is a behavioral piece of research, which is if we make our energy systems more efficient, will we actually harvest that efficiency improvement in lower energy use? Or will we just increase our standard of living and live better with the same amount of energy? But that's I think, research for the future. Environmental impact. Technology can help us to address the environmental impact of our energy sources. For example, we need to do research on fuel switching. How can we use technology to move from high carbon fuels to low carbon fuels to zero carbon fuels? The move today in switching from coal to natural gas in many power plants is an example of benefits from that technology. Nuclear power is a zero carbon energy source, which we today practice at scale. It's the only zero carbon energy source that we do practice at scale. Clearly, more research and technology is needed there to ensure the safety of nuclear power going forward. And you'll hear this afternoon some interesting ideas along those lines. Renewables, technology to create new renewable systems, whether it's solar, wind, bioenergy, geothermal, that enable us to move to, at scale, low carbon or zero carbon technologies. And last, while we continue to use existing carbon sources of energy, how might we capture and sequester the carbon that's in those fuels? Lastly, a key role for technology is driving down cost of these low or zero carbon technologies. Secretary Schultz mentioned the need to level the playing field. I think there's an important role for technology to play in leveling the playing field as well. In a world where, given a carbon pricing or no carbon price, whatever the carbon price is, we try our best to drive those renewable technology costs down through better technology. There are many technology options we need to pursue in order to do that. I think one thing that's clear to all of us in this business is that there is no silver bullet to go after, and we need to engage in a broad and balanced portfolio of research. I outline here a set of the research themes that we organize the Energy Initiative at MIT around. Those include innovations. So recognizing that whatever your favorite picture of the future looks like, we'll be using today's fossil fuels for many years, decades into the future. How do we use those more efficiently and more environmentally responsibly? And there's a whole suite of research that needs to be done there, making combustion systems more efficient, being better at getting hydrocarbons out of the ground, and so on. Second major theme, transformational research. How do we create the new energy technologies, the new energy science for the long-term future? And there is research on the entire suite of renewable technologies, from solar to biofuels to wind and so on. Included in that is research on enabling infrastructures, enabling technologies. So for example, with intermittent renewables, how do we develop the battery systems or the storage technologies that will enable us to integrate those into the energy mix? Third, global energy systems. How do we look at large energy systems that span the globe and impact us in a global sense? Better and more extensive research on climate change and the interactions of that with the economy. More research on the built environment. That's an area that spans the globe. Global transportation systems. These are all major topics in the global systems area. And then lastly, tools. Fundamental science and engineering tools that underlie progress in all those other areas. We're the beneficiaries in research today of advances in fundamental physical and biological sciences that happen since the embargo that Secretary Schultz mentioned. Over the last 35 years or so, the field of molecular biology has developed. And we'll hear this afternoon about some of the really interesting work we can do in metabolic engineering, leveraging that new understanding of molecular biology. Computational chemistry has led to very significant advances in our ability to custom design new materials that propagate throughout the energy business, whether it's new catalysts, whether it's better membranes for separations technologies, whether it's surfaces that enable you to shed water more easily in turbine systems, a whole host of interesting materials problems for energy that we can now tackle much more systematically. So a very broad list of research that we undertake. To give you a sense of what we do at MIT, and no doubt this system is somewhat similar at Stanford, we have about 250 to 300 faculty at MIT who engage with us in the Energy Initiative. That's a 25 to 30% of the faculty. Through the Energy Initiative, in our first 6 years, we have funded about 800 different projects. And those projects, I've binned into those 4 categories in the 2 pie charts here and the 2 on the next slide. What I want you to take away from this is the breadth of the distribution of work across these technologies. And that it's not focused on a single technology, but it's the ability to look at key areas and how they fit together to address our energy future. In transformational technologies, you may notice that the largest single area is solar. We have more than 100 projects underway in solar energy. Probably the largest single program in solar is one that's funded by E&I, known as the Solar Frontier Center, focused on advanced solar technology, so beyond silicon technology, by and large. In the innovations area, this area that looks at how do we make today's technologies more efficient, more environmentally responsible, the largest single area there is hydrocarbons, but that covers a whole lot of different aspects of hydrocarbons, whether it's enhanced oil recovery, whether it's improved combustion efficiency by using computational modeling, a whole range of projects there. But then other technologies and innovation, whether it's safer, novel fuel rod arrangements for nuclear power, heat efficiency in buildings, and so on. In global systems, we have programs ranging from carbon capture and sequestration to projects looking at climate change, climate modeling itself. And in basic tools, the largest single area is nanotechnology, but that frankly doesn't tell you very much, right? Nanotechnology covers the waterfront and ranges from novel solar materials to materials that shed water very easily, right? So big range of projects there. A very significant modeling and simulation effort as well. So I think we're on the right track today with research. I thought it's worthwhile to read you this quote from Will Rogers, that even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there, right? So I think we're on the right track with this very significant research effort we have today in our research universities, but we run the risk of getting run over again if we just sit there. And as a cautionary tale, I'll end with this slide showing federal R&D spending in energy as contrasted with human health. These are data I got from the New York Times. This is up through 2006. So I could add a little bit of data here, but I think this makes the point. This is all in constant 2006 dollars. And you'll see that energy, as Secretary Schultz mentioned, energy funding went up during the embargoes, but in 1984 went down and has remained essentially flat since. Contrast with human health, where funding has gone up rather dramatically since the early 1970s. The message here, as Secretary Schultz said, is that we need increased and sustained funding for R&D in energy. And I look forward in the rest of the afternoon to presentations that talk about some of the really exciting work that's going on there. So this is what's to come. I'm just highlighting here the three panels. We'll look at specific work in transportation, look at electricity in the built environment, and infrastructure. So thank you very much.
I'm Melanie Kinderdine, the Executive Director of the Energy Initiative, not just the woman who told everyone to sit down. I want to introduce the first panel, and I'm just going to introduce the panel chair right now. That is Sally Benson. Sally is the Director of the Global Climate and Energy Project at Stanford, and you all have bios of everyone in your packet, so we're not going to spend time on bios. And so Sally will introduce her panel, and we look forward to hearing from her. Thanks.
If our panelists could please come up and join me, that would be great to come up here and sit. Okay, so now the format is going to change from the earlier format, and we want to try to make this more interactive. So the way we've set this up is that I'll make some introductory remarks talking about potentially game-changing innovations in the transportation sector, and then each of our panelists will speak for about 10 minutes, and then the rest of the time is reserved for questions. So please do think about those questions, and hopefully we can have a really interesting conversations with these really fascinating people we have here. I'd like to begin by just saying a little more about the Global Climate and Energy Project that I'm the director of at Stanford University. It's a really unique collaboration between Stanford University and our industrial partners. They're ExxonMobil, GE, DuPont, and Schlumberger. And since 2002, when it began, GCEP has committed over $176 million for fundamental use-inspired scientific research to develop options for low-carbon energy supply and conversion technologies. In our program, successful innovations have included engines with over 60% efficiency, plants with more degradable lignin that can be converted to biofuels more efficiently, battery components with higher storage efficiencies and longer cycle lives, even wireless charging for moving electric vehicles, and finally, the possibility of making fuels directly from sunlight and water. So our panel today, this discussion today, is going to be focused on game-changing technologies for providing secure, clean, and affordable transportation by improving transportation efficiency, decreasing dependence on oil, and reducing emissions from the transportation sector. Joining me are Dr. Dan Cohen, an expert in advanced engines from MIT, Professor Yi Shui, an expert in batteries from Stanford University, and Professor Greg Stephanopoulos, an expert in biofuels from MIT. Today, transportation is responsible for 25% of U.S. energy demand. Of this, 64% goes for light-duty vehicles, 19% for heavy-duty transportation and trucks, 10% for aviation, 2% for rail, 5% for marine shipping. Of this, 45% of the oil we use is imported today, and last year, Americans spent over $300 billion on oil imports. The United States is the largest consumer of oil, accounting for about 25% of global demand, even though we're only 4.5% of the world's population. The good news is that over the past few years, we've seen a turnaround in dependence on oil imports to meet our transportation needs. New techniques for extracting oil by hydraulically fracturing shale is significantly increasing domestic production and decreasing dependence on imports. In addition, natural gas is becoming a viable option for heavy-duty transport through the establishment of an LNG, liquefied natural gas, distribution network along our major highways for truck transport. Vehicle fleets using CNG, compressed natural gas, are being established. So all of this is really good news, boding well for a reliable supply of transportation fuels. But we can still do more to create a flexible, resilient, and cleaner transportation system now and for the decades ahead. Real strides in improving the efficiency of engines have been made. A new generation of biofuels with high conversion efficiencies is on the way. And advances in battery technologies for electric and hybrid cars have already made huge strides, and exciting advances are in the pipeline. As we've heard earlier today, students and faculty at universities around the country are devoting their efforts to finding innovative solutions for affordable, cleaner, more flexible, and resilient transportation options. Mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, electrical engineers, material scientists, biologists, chemists, physicists, all working together, employing and pushing the frontiers of a whole new generation of scientific inquiry based on the idea of atomic and molecular level design, synthesis, and characterization of materials and processes for energy conversion and supply. And this work is not taking place in an ivory tower. Both the MIT Energy Initiative and Stanford's Precourt Institute for Energy are supported through close collaboration with industry. Large industrial partners, such as those that support the Global Climate and Energy Project, as well as entrepreneurial investments from venture capitalists, are all participating in this budding innovation ecosystem. So now I'd like to turn back to the topic at hand and just give you a framework for how we're going to be discussing these technologies. First, we'll focus on technologies that are ready to move into the marketplace now. there might be some barriers remaining, primarily institutional or financial, but nevertheless are ready now. We'll then identify technologies that are 10 to 15 years out and requiring significant and sustained R&D. And finally, even longer-term technologies requiring significant technological breakthroughs, but with commensurate payoff if these advances are achieved. So with this, I would like to introduce our first speaker. We're going to hear from Dr. Dan Cohen from MIT, who will talk about the use of natural gas-derived alcohols for super-efficient engines that could achieve 50% efficiency gains compared to today's conventional gasoline engines. Efficiency gains provide the dual benefits of both reducing demand for transportation fuels while simultaneously reducing CO2 and other emissions. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Cohen.
Thank you. Finding a large-scale alternative to oil has been very difficult. We've been trying for a long time. And the main reason, in my mind, has been cost. Using oil-derived gasoline and diesel has been cheaper than any of the alternatives. In addition, liquid fuels are easy to store on board, and the fueling of them is easy. So it's quite a challenge to deal with those advantages that gasoline and diesel have. At MIT, we've been looking at a new approach to address these challenges, and it involves optimized use of low-cost alcohol from natural gas. Natural gas, as we've talked about, is an abundant, low-cost fuel. Wouldn't it be great if we could turn it into liquid fuel and use it in a more efficient way in our vehicles? And what I'm going to talk about, the alcohol would be used in super-efficient vehicles that have an efficiency that's up to 50% greater than conventional gasoline engines. And with this efficiency gain, there's both a cost savings because less fuel is used, and there's also a benefit for the environment through reduced CO2. Now, the preferred fuel for doing this is methanol. It's the preferred alcohol, but natural gas-derived ethanol can also be used. Natural gas can be converted into liquid fuels by a well-established approach of converting the gas into what's called a synthesis gas. That synthesis gas is then transformed by a catalyst into the desired liquid fuel. At one end of the spectrum, the natural gas can be used to produce diesel fuel. On the other end of the spectrum, much smaller molecule, the natural gas can be used to produce methanol. And methanol can be used in light-duty vehicles and also in heavy-duty vehicles in the same way that gasoline can be used, that is used in spark ignition engines. Methanol is the lowest cost fuel that can be produced from natural gas, and one that produces the lowest greenhouse gas emissions because it's produced the most efficiently. And it can be produced from shale gas in the US at a lower cost than oil-derived gasoline. And methanol is also a great feedstock for making other fuels. It can be used to produce another alcohol, ethanol, which, like methanol, can be used to enable much higher efficiency. And also it can be used to produce gasoline and dimethyl ether, which is a substitute for propane. Now, both ethanol and methanol have very special properties that enable much higher efficiency engines. One property is very high octane. This high octane comes from both the intrinsic property of the alcohol fuel and from the fact that it provides a large vaporization cooling when it's injected directly. And the high octane reduces engine knock, which is a basic limit on performance of spark ignition engines. With the knock limit removed, it's possible to operate engines at much higher compression ratio and much higher levels of turbocharging. So you can get much more power out of a given size engine. And this makes it possible to replace present engines with much smaller engines, which are more efficient. For example, a 5-liter engine can be replaced by a 2-liter engine. The combination of the high compression ratio and the high level of turbocharging plus the engine downsizing and can provide a fuel efficiency increase of about 30% relative to conventional gasoline engines. This is 15% more efficient than the most efficient gasoline engine, which is the gasoline turbocharged direct injection engine, and it's comparable to the efficiency of diesel engines. Diesel engines are the most efficient engines we have in use now. That's why they're used for heavy-duty trucks. Now, this capability was predicted by computer codes we developed at MIT and subsequently verified by extensive tests at Ford. Now, a second benefit of using alcohol fuel is it enables much better breathing of the engine. And this provides about a 10% further efficiency gain. This efficiency gain has been demonstrated by recent experiments in Belgium at the University of Ghent. So we're up to 40% efficiency gain relative to conventional gasoline engines. And finally, methanol, not ethanol, but methanol, has the property that it can absorb heat from the engine's exhaust. The heat is used to change the methanol into a hydrogen-rich gas, which is then combusted in the engine. And the hydrogen-rich gas has more energy than the methanol, and the reason is the methanol has absorbed heat from the exhaust. So this is a very good heat recovery system. So all these benefits can provide a fuel efficiency gain of more than 50% relative to conventional gasoline engines. So the benefit is a lower cost option than oil-derived fuels. And that lower cost comes from a combination of effects. First, the lower cost fuel on an energy basis. Methanol, as I mentioned, can be produced from natural gas at a cost that's lower than oil-derived gasoline. Second, there is reduced fuel use due to the higher efficiency of the engine, and this efficiency can be obtained at low incremental cost, a very short payback time. So after less than 2 years, the driver starts seeing a full benefit of reduced fuel use and lower expenditures. And finally, for heavy-duty vehicles, this approach can provide a lower cost engine system than the clean diesel. In the environmental area, the much higher efficiency can reduce CO2, and in the case of heavy-duty engines, by substituting spark ignition engines operated with alcohol, this can be a way to very substantially reduce urban air pollutants. Now, Secretary Schultz mentioned flex fuel. It's a very important capability to build into any engine. And this can be built into these super efficient engines in the following way. The engine would use 2 fuel tanks. One fuel tank would contain alcohol or gasoline or a mix of them. And the second fuel tank would contain alcohol, which can be used on demand to prevent knock. And what this does is it enables the engine to operate primarily with gasoline with an efficiency increase of 30% relative to conventional gasoline engines. And with alcohol, it can operate at 50% more. Methanol is already being used in China in a significant way. In China, the use of methanol as a blend with gasoline is comparable to the use of ethanol blended with gasoline in the US, and it's growing. And the reason Chinese are using it is it's a lower cost. Now, if this can be combined with the super efficient engine concept that I described, then there'll be even further cost benefits to Chinese who are using this, and it'll be a way to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And use of, and this is very important for China, use of flex fuel methanol gasoline engines can be an alternative to diesel engines in China at no or minimal cost. And this is very important for cleaning up the very bad air pollution that you've read about in Beijing. A significant amount of it is caused by pollutants from heavy-duty engines, particulate emissions. At the same or minimal cost, the present diesel engine can be replaced by an alcohol engine that can reduce these pollutants by more than 99%. So in summary, this is a ready-to-implement technology for the first 40% of the efficiency gain that I talked about. For the last 10%, some R&D is needed on the device for the heat recovery. And with this technology, natural gas could facilitate large-scale market penetration of an alternative liquid fuel in the U.S. and provide something that can compete with oil-derived fuel. Natural gas-derived ethanol could also be used, but with lower efficiency gain and somewhat higher cost. The advantage to ethanol could be that it's an established fuel now in the U.S. other than methanol. But methanol is a preferred fuel because it's better. And finally, the super efficient engines can be used with a variety of other feedstocks. We've talked about coal, but in addition, these super efficient engines can be used with low carbon feedstocks such as biomass and waste. Thank you.
Okay, next we will hear about renewable biofuel production from Professor Greg Stephanopoulos of MIT. Providing an alternative to oil as a feedstock for transportation fuels will increase the flexibility and resilience in a world with growing demand for oil, particularly in rapidly developing economies. So please welcome Professor Stephanopoulos.
Yeah, the field of biofuels was received with great enthusiasm and great expectations about 10 years ago, but quickly it was filled with bad numbers, bad technologies that promised way more they could deliver, and many misconceptions as well. Also, it is a heavily charged area. Just think of GMOs, think of food versus fuel, think of algae. And all of this discussion is attracting most of the attention, while at the same time, lots of good work is going on, which is changing the technological landscape and the time frame over which these technologies can be deployed in a cost-effective manner in the marketplace. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to give you my bucket list in 5 slides. But before I do that, I'd like to summarize in 4 slides the state of the art today, paying particular attention to the feedstock that we use for biofuels. And the reason I'm doing that is because biofuels, first and foremost, are a feedstock story. So when you look at the 4 different platforms, the first platform is through the use of sugars. And these sugars can be generated in a number of different ways, easy ways and difficult ways. What we have today is corn use and sugar cane in Brazil and the United States, producing sugars, and then these sugars get converted into ethanol, and all of this is a technology which today is producing 12 to 15 billion gallons of ethanol. The difficult way is to look at the abundant cellulosic hydrolysates here, deconstruct this biomass into sugars, and then again convert just the same sugars into any kind of fuels, including also advanced biofuels. Now, the cost of these sugars is defining of the cost efficiency of the process that's going to be used for biofuels. Let me just give you a couple of numbers so that you can put this into perspective. If you are looking to make 1 gallon of a gasoline equivalent biofuel, then you need between 25 and 30 pounds of sugars to do so. So next time you drive, let's say, 30 to 35 miles, and you're thinking about wasting a gallon of fuel, think also about using 30 pounds of sugar to do that. That's a little bit more dramatic if you think in terms of sugar. Now, the cost of sugar today is 15 to 20 cents per pound. So if we are spending 30 pounds per gallon of fuel, that really makes it very expensive to make fuels from sugars. We need to be thinking about a sugar cost in the range of a few pennies per pound in order to make that process a cost-effective process. This deconstruction of biomass here from cellulosics has the potential to get there. It is not there yet, but people are talking about below 10 cents per pound for the availability of sugars for the production of fuels. Now, let me say something. This is available at a volume of hundreds of millions of tons on a sustainable basis in the United States alone. And that by itself can feed enough sugars for the production of fuels that will replace the equivalent of 25% to 30% of the total liquid fuels that we use for transportation today. So it is a big source. It is not there yet, but it is, as we speak, there are at least half a dozen plants which are being commissioned in the United States and the rest of the world, and that is going to be a very important first step in this process. The second is algae. A lot has been said about algae. In the case of algae, we are dealing with a quote-unquote free feedstock, which is CO2 and sun. And these algae are engineered in order to produce a variety of products. You can make algae produce oils, other types of biofuels, or you can just harvest algae for the biomass that they have and convert this biomass into a fuel, just the same as you would be doing with cellulosic biomass. This is a technology which is many years out. You can argue that this technology has a free substrate, which is CO2. It has a very high productivity. It does not compete with land, all of the good things, but there are some major problems, namely the very dilute, very low intensity nature of this process, and also some issues with the photosynthetic efficiency, which require a lot more research in order to make it commercially available. The third technology is a simple technology. It is converting oils, vegetable oils, seed oils, cooking oils into biodiesel. The process is a very simple process. You can do that in your bathtub, essentially. MIT students do that and produce biodiesel from the oils they collect at the MIT cafeterias, and many other places is being done. The problem is the low supply of these oils and the high cost of these oils. So we cannot expect to be making biodiesel more than maybe 1, 2, 3 at most billion gallons per year. So the possibility for that replacing a significant part of liquid fuels is small. And finally, we have gases. There is a path of converting gases into liquid fuels. And these gases can come from natural gas, steel syngas from steel mill. It can also come from gasification of biomass, municipal solid waste, coal. But the point is that this syngas here can be converted directly into ethanol. It can be converted into acetate and then into oil. And also it can be converted into advanced biofuels through the use of engineering of the microbes, and the technology is called metabolic engineering. What this technology does essentially is to engineer the microbes and make them little chemical factories capable of producing the fuel of choice. Now, that technology was a technology which needed 5 to 10 years in order to deliver the product 10 years ago. Now, this is a technology which can deliver the targeted molecule in a matter of months or 1 year to 1.5 years. This is how progress has accelerated the process by which many of these ideas can move into the marketplace. I said in the beginning that biofuels are first and foremost a feedstock story. And let me try to underline what I mean by that. If we begin with a feedstock such as sucrose from corn, glycerol, clean aggregated feedstocks, this is what we have today. And if we are aiming at a biofuel product, we will not be able to make it. At a cost of 10 to 20 cents per pound, clearly this path is going to be prohibitive today. So what we need to do is to use these feedstocks to make chemicals that command a much higher price, and at the same time look at feedstocks with cost in the range of a few pennies per pound and try to convert these feedstocks here into the fuels that we would like to use. This is a viable technology. It begins with a feedstock cost even negative in certain cases, but in the range of 4 to 5 to 6 pennies per pound. And the feedstock cost is affordable for the production of the different kinds of biofuels that we wish to make. Feedstocks such as volatile fatty acids, which are the result of deconstruction of municipal solid waste. Here you are looking at 200 million tons in the United States alone, but also a very large supply in places like Japan, China, India, where they pay a very high premium to dispose of these MSWs. These can be converted into volatile fatty acids, and that indeed can be converted into acetate and other types of fuels that we need today. And that technology is another thing that's been developed in the last 5 years, and I think can be deployed in a short period of time. So the list that I prepared in response to Sally's request for the different types of technologies is shown here. We have today corn ethanol, and there are issues, food versus fuel and subsidies associated with this. Then we have biodiesel in limited supply, at most 2 to 3 billion gallons. Cellulosic ethanol, which can be significant in the range of tens of billions of gallons if the deconstruction technology is perfected and if we achieve low-cost sugars. Let me just say here that this has been slow in coming, but a very important part of this process is the cost of cellulosic biomass. It is high in the United States, and this demands a very high yield and efficiency of deconstruction, conversion into sugars. But in other places, the cost of biomass, other places like India, Brazil, the cost of biomass can be a fifth or even less of what we pay in the United States. And for these supplies of biomass, the use of sugars and production of biofuels is a feasible technology today. Then we have oil from carbohydrates. This is also deployable today. Volatile fatty acids, municipal solid waste, this can produce oil, lipids, and these lipids can be converted into biodiesel. And this can be a very large supply of feedstock, which could replace easily in the range of 15 to 20 billion gallons of biodiesel, of diesel at the present time. Technologies 10 to 15 years out would be fermentation of gases. This becomes increasingly important because it is another path for the utilization of natural gas, especially at small scales, and this is something we can discuss later. And it has a great potential and a very low cost, approximately a quarter of the cost of what we can calculate coming from sugars. And then long term, I would put photosynthetic organisms for a number of reasons. So with this, I'd like to conclude, and I look forward to the discussion later. Thank you.
Okay, so finally, Professor Yi Shui from Stanford University will discuss battery technology that can overcome the current barriers to wider adoption of electric vehicles. A growing fleet of electric vehicles will decrease our dependence on oil for transportation, and as the carbon intensity of our electric system decreases, it can lower CO2 and other emissions from the transportation sector. In the short run, increasing electricity generation with natural gas will help to lower the carbon emissions from the grid. And over the coming decades, increased penetration of renewable energy sources will further reduce emissions. And eventually, in the much longer term, carbon capture and storage, both for coal as well as natural gas-fired electricity generation, can reduce emissions to the very, very low levels that will be needed in the future. Thus, electrification of the transport sector, particularly light-duty vehicles, is a real game changer, both for reducing oil imports as well as lowering emissions. So please join me in welcoming Professor Shui.
Well, thank you, Sally. So I'm going to spend 10 minutes to tell you one story, very simple. I'm going to tell you what's the story right now on the first slide. Is you look at the batteries, 7 years ago, almost nobody cared about batteries. And then suddenly, there's recognition in the society. Batteries can be very important to enable electrical vehicles. There's a boom of battery research. So the story is, in the past 5 years or so, roughly 5 years, some R&D money going to the batteries, it actually gets us somewhere. This is what I'm going to show you today. 5 years of research, we are getting to somewhere very exciting, highly promising. With sustainable research funding coming into energy, such as battery areas, we'll keep this going and make a lot of technology become real in the applications. So, and battery field is slightly different from previous like biofuels field, because the battery fields right here is already existing mature application. There's huge market right there you can leverage in order to enable clean energy storage. We know the electrical car, we know flight, we need batteries, and also large scale stationary storage. This is a whole set of application areas. A lot of opportunity really exists. Then you start to ask, what are really the game changers right there we are looking for in the battery sectors? And let me mention the opportunity first. First of all, make sure it's versatile. Today's energy storage market in terms of terawatt hour is not that big, but potentially this can grow 1,000 times. This means a lot. Come back to the early talk by Secretary Schultz is this a national security issue. In addition, there's environmental protection as well as certainly jobs, a lot of economic opportunities as well. So what really defines the game changers right there? What do you really desire for the batteries? You want the energy density per weight or volume 2 to 5 times bigger. You want your car to run certainly a much longer distance. You want the cost per energy, per kilowatt hour, that's the measure, 3 to 5x less. You want that reduction. You want it to be safe, so you can burn 787, you don't have concern. You want the cycle life, the calendar life, to be much longer. Roughly, we want 10 years, 20 years. We need the cycle life, charge-discharge cycle 10 times longer. These are the game changers. If you can realize that, there will be a lot of exciting opportunity coming along. So in the materials and in the battery architecture processing in the tool, there's many, many opportunities right there to do innovation. In the past 5 years, with some R&D money coming in more than the previous years, there's a whole landscape of battery technology now appealing, ranging from near term, middle term, and a long term. So near term, I really mentioned roughly 5 years also, 5 years more R&D, you can see a significant application appealing, and midterm is roughly 5 to 15 years, longer term more than 15 years. So let's see what are the possibilities right there. If you only think about what's in the market, certainly it's depressing. But if you want to look at what's really coming, it's actually very promising. The most left-hand side, this is where we are right now. For example, for the lithium-ion batteries, carbon anode combining with different type of cathode. This is the type of energy you can get just based on the material, electron materials weight. So it doesn't count the packaging yet. Roughly divide this number by a little bit more than 2 also, you will get the realistic energy number. Now moving down, you see the future and having a silicon anode. I'm going to tell you in one more slide. And coming in, this can get you somewhere. And with lithium anode coming in, combined with these cathode materials, you are looking at 3x improvement is possible very soon. And it's potentially possible for the long term to get out to 5x improvement or more. So this is really the possibility we are looking at right now. So let me give you a few examples. Some coming from Stanford, some come from MIT, some come from my own research group. Here's one example. I remember 7 years ago, I have 0 experience in batteries, but because it becomes so important, I started to work in these areas. I applied what I learned in the nanotechnology to really try to enable, for example, silicon anode to replace existing carbon anode. That can store 10 times more charges to enable a much higher energy density batteries. Here are a subset of the pictures I show you. These are all kind of nanomaterials, including wires, hollow particles, and double wall tubes. And this cartoon of Yoshio nanoscale design allow us to overcome challenging problems related to next generation of battery materials. Now it's possible to cycle this type of materials, which thought was not possible before, now become possible to 6,000 cycles, getting close to what you need for the electrical vehicles. Another example I would like to show is a sulfur cathode, most recently developed in my own research group. And sulfur can combine with lithium 10 times more than lithium cobalt oxide, and it has a voltage roughly about half of that. So you are talking about you can have combined with lithium metal, you can have 5 times of the energy per unit weight compared to the existing lithium-ion batteries. Using the nanoparticle sulfur with certain coating, we show now it's possible to really having 1,000 cycles, showing make it very promising for vehicle application and also for large-scale energy storage. So there are more examples, let's say for the midterm and the long term. If you can enable a lithium metal anode, and that is going to be really excellent. Lithium metal is lightweight, it has a huge capacity. There's a lot of challenges ahead. The lithium dendrite formation causes a safety issue. There's more lithium formation, the efficiency is not that high. But there's a number of approaches appealing in the past time period, including using ceramics, electrolyte, using this all solid state electrolyte, using copolymer, using additive, and this solution now developed try to enable opportunity in these areas. Also, looking at the long term, a lot of you hear about metal air type of batteries, and this was funded quite heavily within the ARPA-E's program when Arun Majumdar was the director. And they're taking the lithium and oxygen almost like burning a fuel, but this fuel is solid state. It's lithium through electrochemical method. It has a huge energy density right there. Certainly, it has a lot of challenges need to be overcome. But does provide long-term opportunities for research and development to go into. So some of the promising examples appear, for example, in last year in the Science magazine, and it's showing there's more understanding. Now it's possible to charge and discharge over, let's say, 100 cycles also. So progress has been made in these areas. So I also want to spend a couple of slides since I talk about batteries. Batteries are also a possible choice for the grid scale. Let me also mention a couple of slides on the grid scale. Some of the game changers for the grid is absolutely very low-cost batteries. Cycle forever, never die. That's what you are really looking for. And one example is, this is called Prussian blue. This used to be used to dye your gene to become blue color. It was produced by the megaton per year, but there's not a whole lot of application after you just dye the gene, and these materials now is considered 150-year-old materials, and these can be really excellent battery materials. You can cycle 40,000 cycles, they don't die. It's an aqueous solution, sodium, potassium as the ion to intercalate, so they're very, very low cost. Opportunity like this really exists. And I want to also mention the last one is, and for the grid scale storage, and this is called flow batteries. You store your energy by the tank and flow through batteries. You can charge and recharge to connect with electrical grid. So in the past several years, there's a number of exciting ideas, developing using all kind of ions to reduce the cost to increase the energy density. And Yeming Chang, for example, and MIT used this semi-solid to load it into this liquid, so you can flow this semi-solid. Don Satterway is trying to do all liquid metal batteries. Very, very exciting concept as well. So I think I'm going to just stop right here. I think it's a very exciting time for different sectors to work together, having some sustainability and the research funding and the effort. I mean, there will be even more exciting things coming up in the next 5 years. Thank you.
Okay, we now have time for questions. So if you have a question, just please stand up and And there are mics, okay, mics will be passed around, and maybe if you could just state your name and where you're from, that would be great.
I don't know how to get through.
So we'll start up
I'm sorry.
up here, and then
I'm
we'll go
trying to
to the
get
gentleman
through.
standing up after that.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
So I wanted to ask a question to the three different technologies about system or infrastructure issues that you see that might be an impediment to scale up with the different technologies, either the alcohols for fuels or the biotechnology routes to alcohols or the batteries. Could you comment on that as a system for transportation?
Seems like all of you have something to say, so maybe
Okay,
just...
should I start? I think in the case of the alcohol fuels, the infrastructure issues aren't very demanding. The alcohol fuels are liquid fuels like gasoline, and we've already seen that we can provide an alternative fuel structure quite readily for ethanol, both in Brazil and in the U.S., and the cost is much smaller than any other infrastructure system. So I don't think that's a very significant barrier.
Actually, with biofuels, I think it's exactly the opposite. And that's what's been impeding the deployment of cellulosic biofuels for the last, and actually make them evolve at a lot slower pace than anticipated. For example, today, if someone can secure, say, 10 million bushels of corn, then you take this, this is bankable, you can get a loan to build a plant, there is a contractor who is going to deliver the plant for you with guarantees about the performance of the ethanol that will be produced and so on and so forth. If you go to a banker with 2 million tons of cellulose, he will say, what is this? Who is going to build the plant? I can't give you a loan. I cannot ensure the transportation of the bales of biomass into a particular place. So there are all of these issues which I think are far more important than technological issues right now. And they seem to be coming in place, but it's taking much longer than anticipated.
I'll speak for the battery side. You know, the battery really come from the technology. Let's say lithium-ion is your cell phones and laptops. Now you want to use it for transportation. Just from the size of application, there's a few orders of magnitude difference right there. Yes, for the batteries to have the scalability to impact transportation, I believe we need to have something in the manufacturing side to do a lot better and a lot more high throughput in order to enable that. That's why I think this is a place to have invention, how to do large-scale manufacturing tailored to the energy application instead of just a portable electronics application.
Okay, great. So in the gentleman in the back, and then if you standing up, and if you could just state your name and where you're from, that would be wonderful. I'm sorry. This gentleman back there was waiting first, so yeah.
Jim Woolsey, Lux Capital. I have a question about grid security and particularly the flow battery, given the optimistic possibilities for it. We saw in Sandy what can happen when millions of people are without electricity for some time. The rest of the infrastructure goes down too, because all 17 other of our critical infrastructures depend on electricity. But there were places in New York, some had combined heat and power, some had different types of hookups to the grid that were able to island, were able to use early level microgrids and the rest in order to keep operating even when the grid all around them was down. How might we be able to use flow batteries with some of the characteristics of distributed generation from gas and from solar and from wind to make it possible for people in circumstances like that, or even worse, if it had been intentionally caused, say by PLA hacking, how could we make it at least possible, and how long would it take for us to be able to all have some electricity, even if we don't have everything that we want?
You know, maybe I'll kind of take that. That's actually the precise topic of the third panel discussion. So having said that, if anyone here would like to offer an opinion, please go ahead, but we will cover that explicitly.
I offer a little bit right here since it's related to batteries. So, well, I mean, what you said is exactly right. Can you have enough large scale storage to enable certain time of storage, even the whole grid is down? Now, this all comes down to the cost of the large scale flow battery storage. We are about, 3 times off, 3 to 4 times off also. If the cost it can be low, roughly a number $100 per kilowatt hour, we will be in business. We are not too far away. If you look down the learning curve we have for the past 5 years also, we roughly cut down the cost by about half. So down the road, 5 years, a little maybe longer than 5 years, 5 to 10 years also, if another significant cost reduction can be possible, then this is really become possible.
Okay, great. Okay, we'll take this one here, and then afterwards, the very patient gentleman who's been standing in the middle of the room.
Very quick question for Dr. Stephanopoulos. I'm Mike Telson, General Atomics. I want you to pursue a little further what you said about the 10 to 15-year period from gas being able to get your biofuel costs by a factor of 4 down. Is that dependent on the price of gas staying low or the processes being developed? Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Because that's really a big game changer.
Yeah, these are really stoichiometric mass balance calculations based on the energy content of glucose versus the energy content of natural gas, and how much you can get from natural gas versus how much you get from glucose, and how much you pay for natural gas versus how much you pay for glucose. The 1/4 is kind of conservative. It is better than that. So it allows even for a doubling of the price of natural gas from the present levels. I think it's going to stay pretty much the same level.
Thank you. Paul Beaton, National Academy of Sciences. I have a question about bringing methanol onto a larger scale. Regarding, if you elaborate a little bit on any advancements or the current state of storage, given the proclivity of it to leak into water tables and its toxicity.
Well, with regard to toxicity, its toxicity is comparable to that of a gasoline overall. And actually, if you compare transport of methanol to transport of oil, if methanol had been transported from Valdez back in 1989 rather than gasoline, it would have been all gone in a year or so, whereas, as we know, the oil from the Exxon Valdez stayed for a very long time. So methanol has the advantage of being biodegradable. Also, it's a safer fuel in terms of crashes. The EPA has shown far fewer deaths as a result of fires and explosions.
Okay, I think we'll move to the far back of the room, and then we'll come up to the front again. So, yes.
Yeah, my name is Michael Greenstone from MIT. I wonder if the first two speakers could talk about the greenhouse gas implications of methanol and the various biofuels relative to petroleum.
At comparable engine efficiencies, and methanol produced from natural gas has about the same greenhouse gas emissions as oil-derived gasoline. But with the increased efficiency that's enabled by methanol, the greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced by about 30% relative to a conventional gasoline engine vehicle, 30 to 35%.
Actually, there is a study of the National Academy of Engineering that was completed about 3 years ago on alternative fuels from coal and biomass, and it points out to pretty much the same result. This is for the MTG process.
So it seems like one controversial issue with respect to the biofuels is accounting for the full life cycle of the cutting down of the trees. And is that 30 to 35% for the biofuels, taking fully account of that?
Yeah, probably you're referring to the change of land use issues. The NAE study intentionally avoided any kind of biomass supply that might include any kind of change of land use. That is a number which is not easy to calculate. When you do LCA, including change of land use, you need to put your boundaries around some kind of a control volume, which is difficult to do. So instead of struggling with that issue, we decided in the panel to avoid that altogether. And if there was any indication that a particular supply of cellulosic biomass was going to include any change of land use, then we left that out. As a result of this, for example, the Department of Energy estimate of sustainable biomass is something of the order of 1.4 billion tons per year. The NAE study assumes something in the range of 400 to 600 million tons, which is substantially below the DOE estimate. So it is a lot more conservative because it does not include any issues of land use.
Great. Okay, we'll come up here, yeah, and then we'll move to the back of the room again.
Melanie Kinderdine, MIT. Listening to the panel, it reminds me of a symposium we had at MIT a little less than a year ago. We typically issue a report from our it's a
nobody agreed at the symposium, and there are kind of different visions about transportation up here, and I'm just wondering what's a policymaker to do when they look at what you all are talking about, because it's a huge investment decision and important for the country, and I know you're all scientists and technologists, but what about the policy?
Well, I would say you have to try to put it on a common basis for comparison, and I think the most important basis out of the gate is cost, because cost determines whether something is going to be used in large scale or not, and then you have to get agreement among people as to the cost for various technologies as a function of time. Some technologies meet the cost criteria in the near term, others would meet it in the longer term. You have to assign a probability to meeting cost goals in the longer term. That needs very careful assessment, and that's something that engineers and scientists should be able to talk about and try to come to agreement on. And I think the same thing is true with regard to the environmental impacts.
Let market pick. That will be my shorter answer to that, yeah.
Actually, if I can add something here, there have been some failures of the market, and in really accounting for all of the different factors, big failures, and that is very puzzling to me, because those could have been prevented by simple back-of-the-envelope calculations in many cases. I don't know how to explain that. Perhaps people jump on something because it is really fashionable and hot, and they don't do the due diligence that would tell them the real truth. But I'm a firm believer in numbers, and I think that if you put people, the issues arise when we become qualitative. So I think that people with good intentions, if you put them in the same room for an hour, they've got to agree on the numbers never lie. Maybe I'm oversimplifying things, but I think that that's an easy issue to resolve if you do the due diligence.
Okay, we've got two hands up over here, so why don't we go to the first one here? Yeah, well, whatever you two can. There we go, good. And then you'll get it afterwards, and then we'll go back to the back of the room.
I'm Suresh Bhaskaran, Pacific Northwest National Lab. I was intrigued by your suggestion concerning the use of municipal solid waste, volatile fatty acid as a feedstock for the fuel. Some years ago, when we did an analysis in the Pacific Northwest, we identified MSWs as the most attractive feedstock. but there's not really that much done after that. And I was wondering whether you had actually done an economic analysis, given that it's a very attractive resource if you look at it across the United States with over 300 million tons per year or so.
I'm in the process of doing that. This is one of the things that have been happening behind the scenes, like I said before, and it depends very much on what one is going to do with MSW. The process makes a big difference. The easiest thing to do with that is to put them in a hole in the ground and let them digest anaerobically for a long time, so you don't pay expensive reactors. The result of this is going to be a dilute stream of volatile fatty acids, which essentially has zero value. Who wants to do anything with that? So you've got to have a technology that takes these volatile fatty acids and converts them into something useful. So that's one of the organisms that we have developed. And it converts the VFAs into something useful and concentrates that at the same time. So you have a concentrated stream of lipids, for example, coming out of waste. And I think that's quite promising. The real issue here is not technology, it is the upstream systems aspects that Bob alluded to before. How can that be concentrated, processed, made available in an aggregated form in a particular place, so you can go there and put a plant to process that and make lipids out of it?
I think there's another aspect to it, which is an alternative route is to gasify the waste and convert it into synthesis gas, similar to the conversion of natural gas into liquid fuels that I talked about. And I think it would be useful to compare the synthesis gas conversion of MSW for different fuels to the biochemical conversion. In some cases, one might be better than the other. In some cases, it would be vice versa. But I think that would be a very interesting comparison. I think one thing that can be said about municipal solid waste as far as being attractive is it's a negative cost feedstock. I mean, people pay you to take it away, and that's a good start.
And you could also produce electricity from it. And so I think these systematic comparisons between a variety of options is really important, so we sort of don't jump on a path that ends up being a dead end. Okay, so we have, yes, you please, thank you. Yeah.
Just a brief comment on the last interchange. It seems to me municipal solid waste is an attractive market for electricity generation. So what makes the argument to move it towards a liquid fuels feedstock? But I wanted to push Dr. Cohn on one question, which is you essentially made an economic argument for this rather than a technology push to move towards methanol as a fuel source. I'm seeing with a couple of women from comments, so maybe I should direct the question to them. But you said there are barriers. I'm sorry. There are some barriers to deployment, given the strong economics for reducing fuel costs at the individual truck level. Why isn't there more penetration and more engine design work going on the commercial side? And then if I could ask Dr. Stephanopoulos, you sort of gave short shrift to photosynthetic organisms as being way out in the future, and I wonder if you could comment a little bit more on that.
Well, in the U.S., the major players in transportation, the auto companies and the oil companies, are not interested in methanol. This wasn't the case in the late 80s and early 90s when methanol was the preferred option, but it is now. And I don't want to attempt to try to explain, the reasons for their business decisions. I think a good example of what would happen when economics is the most important factor is what's happened in China. I mean, it's being blended province by province, and people are doing it because it saves money, and I think that's the way it should be as long as it meets environmental standards.
Okay, oops, we have time for one more question, and I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, okay.
A quick comment about electricity versus liquid fuels. If you take the price of electricity that a sugarcane processor collects by exporting the extra electricity by burning his bagasse to the grid, to the Brazilian grid, that translates into something like no more than $15 per ton of bagasse that's been incinerated, that's been combusted. That's an extremely low price to pay for bagasse to convert that into a liquid fuel. If you were to use bagasse at the same price, you would have an internal rate of return by converting that into a liquid fuel that would be at least 3 times higher than burn and make electricity. On photosynthesis, there are many problems with photosynthesis. I mean, I mentioned the advantages in my remarks before, but one very important thing is to remember that if you're going to make a gallon of oil by some kind of a photosynthetic system, you need to move around 2,000 gallons of water, because it is just half a gram of, even more than that, half a gram per liter is the content of fuel that you make in that system. The productivities, they need to move from something like 800 gallons per acre per year today to something like 10 to 15,000 gallons. And that is not going to happen by the usual engineering improvements of an open pond. You need a drastically different approach involving the engineering of the microorganism to do so.
Okay, I thought I earlier saw some people in the back of the room. Is there one more question from the back, or? Okay, yes, please.
Hi,
Thank
I'm
you.
Karen Wayland. I do energy policy work in town. I'm also a geochemist, so your slide with the catalyst sort of struck me, and I'm wondering, you know, there's a huge policy push right now for natural gas vehicles burning straight natural gas, and I'm wondering if there's a barrier in terms of a scaling up of the methanol that's related to the catalyst, and whether there's something in the catalyst that eventually will, whether there's a limiting availability issue for
I don't see it.
advanced
No,
catalysts.
these don't require special expensive materials.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you for the interesting questions.
Want to stretch their legs?